Beloved, hear me, prayer is not a ritual. It is a lifeline. It is the very atmosphere that sustains the spirit of a man in alignment with God. Many see prayer as a tool to negotiate with heaven. But let me tell you, prayer is first for your transformation before it is for your requests. When you engage in prayer, you are not merely speaking into the air. You are standing at the courts of the King of Kings. Your words, wrapped in faith, ascend as incense before the throne. This is why faith must power your prayer. Without faith, words become empty echoes. Prayer is also the womb of possibilities. Everything you admire in the life of those who walk in power is sponsored by consistent prayer. Consistency in prayer is proof of seriousness with destiny. One moment of prayer may open a door, but a lifestyle of prayer builds a fortress around your life. Understand this: there are realms of prayer that words cannot capture. There is a groaning in the spirit where your heart begins to utter mysteries too deep for human language. It is in those moments that burdens are lifted, destinies are aligned, and doors are opened. Do not be weary in prayer. Results may not always come instantly, but persistence is the currency of champions. When men pray, heavens respond. But when men stop praying, destiny stagnate. So today, as you lift your voice in prayer, I declare strength upon you. May your altar of prayer never go cold. May your faith rise like fire. May your words pierce through the heavens and birth realities in your life. Beloved, your destiny will rise or fall to the degree of your prayer life. Let this be the day you decide that prayer is no longer a choice, but a necessity. Prayer is not just an activity for the religious or a duty to be checked off from a daily list. It is the very essence of communion between humanity and divinity, a spiritual technology designed to bring a mortal man into alignment with the eternal purposes of God. And when it is engaged with understanding, it becomes the most powerful force that can shape destiny, alter outcomes, and command results in both the seen and unseen realms. Because true prayer is far beyond reciting words. It is an interaction that allows a man to participate in the will of heaven. And this is why men who understand the value of prayer do not treat it as casual or optional. For they recognize that prayer is to the spirit what breathing is to the body, the guarantee of life, strength, and continuity. Yet for prayer to deliver its full weight, it must be powered by faith. Because words without faith are empty sounds that cannot travel into the courts of heaven. And faith is not mere optimism, but a persuasion that God hears, responds, and is able to do what he has promised. Which means every time you open your mouth in prayer, you must first settle the question of belief in your heart. Otherwise, your declarations remain powerless. And when faith is present, prayer ceases to be a religious exercise and becomes a transaction with spiritual potency. A moment where decrees are sealed, burdens are lifted, and answers are released. But beyond faith, the strength of prayer lies in consistency. Because while one prayer may open a door, it is repeated and intentional communion that builds an altar. And altars are the places where men and spirits meet, where covenants are activated, and where power is sustained. So a man who prays occasionally may stumble into results, but a man who builds a consistent prayer life will become a portal through which heaven can continually find expression on earth. And that consistency is what transforms prayer from a mere request system into a lifestyle of power. Yet one of the most profound truths about prayer is that its first assignment is not to change things outside of you, but to change you, to mold your character, to align your desires with God's desires, and to shape your perspective so that even before situations shift, you are already transformed. And this is why people who tarry in the place of prayer carry an atmosphere of strength, wisdom, and discernment, because they are changed in the process. And as you rise deeper in prayer, you will also discover that words sometimes fail because the burdens of destiny cannot always be articulated in human language. And at such points, the Spirit of God empowers the believer to groan and utter mysteries that transcend vocabulary. And those groanings are often the birthing process of miracles, the travailing that precedes the manifestation of glory. And if a man can yield himself to that dimension, he becomes a carrier of divine secrets and a midwife of divine possibilities. However, prayer also requires persistence, because even when answers are delayed, it is not proof that God has ignored. It is often because spiritual laws are being aligned and seasons are being perfected, and many destinies are short-circuited because men stopped praying too early. But champions understand that persistence is the seal of victory, that it is not always the loudest prayer that prevails, but the most consistent one, the one that continues to rise until heaven responds. And so it must be known that when men pray, the heavens do not remain silent, because the earth has never lacked results due to the unwillingness of God. It has only lacked men who can stand in prayer until heavens will become the reality of earth. And today, as you choose to engage prayer not as a ritual, but as a necessity, you will discover that your words can frame your reality. Your faith can draw unseen possibilities into manifestation, and your persistence can compel the release of answers long delayed. And so let every moment in prayer be approached with understanding, with faith, with consistency, and with persistence, because therein lies the true secret of power, the secret of transformation, and the secret of living a destiny that is not ordinary, but sponsored by the hand of God Himself. Prayer is not merely an act of reciting words or voicing out desires. It is the deepest and most powerful channel through which humanity communes with divinity. A system of spiritual alignment designed by God to bring the will of heaven into manifestation on earth. To a man of understanding, prayer is not an option. It is the very oxygen of the Spirit, sustaining life, guiding destiny, and creating possibilities that human effort can never achieve. When prayer is engaged with knowledge, it becomes more than a ritual. It transforms into a force that carries creative power. And this is why those who master prayer become channels of divine intervention. Every time a man prays with faith, he establishes legal permission for heaven to intervene in earthly affairs, because prayer is the meeting point of human weakness and divine strength. Yet prayer without faith is empty sound. It cannot travel into the courts of heaven. Faith is the fuel that gives prayer its authority, the conviction that God is both willing and able to respond. This means prayer must never be engaged as a religious exercise alone, but as a transaction of confidence, where the believer stands fully persuaded that words spoken with faith can shape realities and command results. Still, beyond faith, the true strength of prayer is revealed in consistency. While a single prayer may open a door, it is repeated. Consistent communion that builds an altar, and altars are the places where spiritual traffic is sustained, where covenants are activated, and where destinies are preserved. A man who prays occasionally may see occasional results, but a man who builds a consistent life of prayer becomes a living altar himself, carrying the atmosphere of God wherever he goes. In this sense, prayer does not just change situations. It first changes the man who prays. Transformation is the first gift of prayer, for in those secret places of communion, desires are purified, perspectives are aligned, and strength is imparted. By the time answers manifest in the physical, the person praying has already been reshaped into a vessel fit for the answer he seeks. As prayer deepens, it transcends human language. There comes a realm where vocabulary is too limited to carry the weight of destiny. And at that point, the Spirit empowers the believer with groanings and utterances that bypass the mind and birth realities directly from the womb of the Spirit. These are the moments where destinies are travailed into manifestation, where burdens that cannot be explained in human terms are lifted, and where the invisible realm bows to the persistence of spiritual labor. It is here that the mystery of persistence becomes vital, because many give up when answers seem delayed, not knowing that prayer is not only about immediate results, but about sustaining pressure until spiritual laws align and divine seasons mature. Champions are not those who pray once and walk away. They are those who hold on, those who understand that persistence is the seal of victory. In the economy of the Spirit, it is not the volume of words that always counts, but the endurance of faith expressed in prayer. Men who pray until results come are men who carry proof that God answers. For when men pray, the heavens do not remain silent. Rather, spiritual atmospheres are shifted, angelic activities are stirred, and doors are compelled to open. Every great destiny is born and sustained by prayer, and the absence of prayer is the absence of power. To treat prayer as optional is to make destiny vulnerable, but to embrace prayer as a lifestyle is to choose alignment with the eternal counsel of God. Therefore, every believer must approach prayer with revelation, with unwavering faith, with unbroken consistency, and with tireless persistence, knowing that through prayer, a man is transformed, situations are altered, and the supernatural becomes natural. The destiny of nations, families, and individuals is tied to the strength of their altars, and that strength is measured not in what they know alone, but in how consistently they bend their knees in prayer until the will of heaven is birthed upon the earth. Prayer is far more than an act of religion or a daily routine of uttering words. It is the lifeblood of the Spirit, the bridge between mortal men and the immortal God. The divine system created to sustain alignment between the will of heaven and the destiny of man on earth. When a man truly understands prayer, he no longer treats it as a casual practice or a backup plan in times of trouble, but as the atmosphere in which his spirit must constantly dwell to survive. Prayer is not first about changing circumstances outside. It is first about changing the man within, shaping his thoughts, purifying his motives, and conforming his will to the will of God. This is why those who give themselves to prayer carry a fragrance of power and discernment, because in the secret place of communion, they are transformed into living vessels of strength. However, prayer without faith is empty and powerless, because faith is the substance that makes prayer legally valid in the realm of the Spirit. It is not enough to utter words. They must be backed by unshakable confidence in the ability and willingness of God to respond. Faith gives authority to words, and when prayer is fueled by faith, it ceases to be a mere activity and becomes a force that compels outcomes. But beyond faith, consistency is the true test of seriousness with destiny. Occasional prayers may produce occasional results, but consistent prayer builds a spiritual altar, and altars are the meeting points where men host God and transact with the realm of the Spirit. A consistent prayer life makes a man an altar himself, carrying within him the atmosphere of heaven that influences everything around him. As a believer presses deeper into prayer, he soon discovers that human language is insufficient to carry the burdens of destiny. There comes a point where words fail, where the Spirit takes over, groaning with utterances too deep for human vocabulary. In these moments, prayer moves beyond asking and requesting to a realm of travailing, birthing, and midwifing divine possibilities into manifestation. This is why the greatest breakthroughs are often not born out of eloquent speech in prayer, but from deep spiritual groaning that pierces through the heavens. In that realm, the Spirit partners with the believer, empowering his frailty and making him a channel through which heaven's decrees find expression. Such moments of prayer are not always accompanied by immediate results, but persistence is the key that seals victory. Many destinies stagnate, not because God was unwilling, but because men abandoned the altar too early. Persistence means staying in prayer until the seasons align, until doors open, until answers manifest. Champions in the Spirit are not those who pray when it is convenient, but those who continue even when there is no visible result, because they understand that prayer accumulates power over time. It is the endurance of faith that provokes lasting results, not the casualness of half-hearted devotion. When men pray and refuse to give up, atmospheres shift, angelic assistance is released, and stubborn situations yield to divine authority. The ultimate reality is that prayer is the womb of every great destiny. No man rises in power without first rising in prayer. Every transformation, every breakthrough, every release of grace is sponsored by men and women who refuse to let their altars go cold. To ignore prayer is to make one's destiny vulnerable, but to embrace prayer is to align with the eternal counsel of God, thereby making oneself a conduit of divine possibilities on earth. Prayer is the greatest equalizer, for it takes the weak and clothes them with strength. It takes the ordinary and anoints them for extraordinary exploits, and it takes the broken and makes them vessels of glory. The destiny of nations, families, and individuals is tied to the strength of their prayer lives, and history has always been shifted by men who understood this truth. Therefore, prayer must never be seen as optional. It is necessity. It is survival. It is the secret that sustains relevance in both time and eternity. A man who prays walks with a confidence that is not rooted in his abilities, but in the backing of heaven. His life becomes proof that the supernatural is real, and his destiny becomes a testimony that when men call upon God with faith, consistency, persistence, and understanding, heaven will always answer. Prayer is not an ordinary act of spirituality or a simple communication tool, as many have reduced it to. It is the breath of the Spirit, the atmosphere that sustains the believer and empowers him to live beyond the limitations of the natural. It is the highest privilege given to man, the opportunity to partner with God in bringing his will from eternity into time. To treat prayer casually is to misunderstand its power, because prayer is the engine room of transformation, the womb that births possibilities, and the altar where strength is exchanged. A man that prays is never ordinary, because each time he bends his knees, he aligns himself with the counsel of heaven, and his life becomes a reflection of divine backing. Yet it must be known that prayer without faith is powerless. It is faith that gives prayer its authority and makes words spoken rise as incense before God. Faith is the confidence that the God who hears is willing and able to respond. And without this persuasion, prayer remains empty noise in the realm of the Spirit. When faith powers prayer, it becomes a force that shapes reality, opens doors, and dismantles obstacles, because God responds not only to words, but to the conviction behind those words. Consistency is another mystery that governs effective prayer. Occasional prayer may stir moments of visitation, but only consistent prayer sustains a climate of power. A consistent prayer life builds an altar, and altars are the meeting places between heaven and earth, where men and God interact, where transactions of destiny are carried out, and where covenants are activated. Every man who carries true spiritual authority is a man of altars, for authority is not conferred by mere knowledge, but by sustained communion. This is why consistency is not only about discipline, it is about survival, because the spirit realm recognizes those who maintain a fire that never goes out. Through consistency, prayer stops being an event and becomes a lifestyle. And when a man becomes prayer itself, he unconsciously carries the atmosphere of heaven everywhere he goes. Such a man is not defined by his surroundings. Instead, his very presence shifts environments because he has become a mobile altar of fire. As one journeys deeper in prayer, words often become insufficient to capture the weight of spiritual burdens. There comes a point where human vocabulary fails and the Spirit intercedes with groanings that cannot be uttered, empowering the believer to travail for things his mind cannot even comprehend. This dimension of prayer is not intellectual. It is a spiritual birthing process where destinies are pushed into manifestation and where invisible battles are won. It is in this realm that prayer transcends requests and becomes a weapon of warfare, a tool for midwifing divine purposes into reality. Yet it is persistence that guarantees that the travail does not end prematurely. Many times, answers are delayed not because God is unwilling, but because times and seasons are being aligned, and men must remain at the altar until heaven's timing meets earth's expectation. Champions are those who refuse to give up even when nothing seems to change, because they understand that persistence is the language of victory in the Spirit. The destiny of individuals, families, and even nations is shaped by prayer. History has never lacked men who turned the tides of events through prayer, and destinies have never been transformed without the sacrifice of those who travailed at altars until answers came. Prayer is the womb of greatness, the secret place of power, and the system God designed for men to legislate his will on earth. When prayer becomes optional, destiny becomes vulnerable, but when it becomes a necessity, life takes on a supernatural dimension. It is through prayer that the weak are clothed with strength, the ordinary are transformed into vessels of wonder, and the broken are rebuilt into instruments of glory. Every man who desires to live a life of meaning must embrace prayer, not as a religious duty, but as a lifeline. Because without it, nothing lasting can be birthed. To pray with faith, to pray with consistency, to pray with persistence, and to pray with understanding is to step into the realm where heaven responds. And when heaven responds, no power on earth or in hell can stop the fulfillment of destiny. Prayer is more than a religious exercise or a way to ease a guilty conscience. It is the very life wire of the believer, the system by which man connects to divinity and draws strength to walk in victory. To neglect prayer is to embrace weakness, but to embrace it is to step into a life where the natural is constantly overruled by the supernatural. Every time a man kneels in prayer, he is not just uttering words into the air. He is legislating the will of heaven upon the earth. It is in the place of prayer that destinies are shaped, wisdom is granted, burdens are lifted, and strength is renewed. Yet prayer only becomes effective when it is mixed with faith. Without faith, prayer becomes empty utterances with no impact in the spirit. Faith is the engine that powers prayer, giving it life and authority before God. Faith is not blind hope. It is the deep persuasion that God is who he says he is, and that he will do what he has promised. A man who prays with faith does not beg in despair. He decrees with conviction, and heaven responds to his declarations. Consistency is another foundation of powerful prayer. While one prayer may open a door, it is consistent prayer that keeps doors open and sustains the atmosphere of divine possibilities. Consistency builds what Scripture refers to as an altar, a spiritual meeting point where heaven and earth connect. Every great man in history who walked in unusual power was first a man of consistent prayer. It is not occasional passion that births lasting transformation, but daily communion that refuses to die out. A man who prays once in a while may stumble upon answers, but a man who prays consistently becomes a living altar, carrying the presence of God everywhere he goes. In such a life, prayer is no longer an event. It becomes the very environment in which the person lives. His words, his decisions, and his actions are influenced by the fire that burns continually within him. This is why consistency is not just about discipline, it is about survival, for no believer can fulfill destiny without sustaining a lifestyle of prayer. As prayer grows deeper, it transcends human language. There are moments when the weight of destiny, the burdens of the Spirit, and the groanings of creation cannot be captured in ordinary words. At such points, prayer becomes travail, and the Spirit of God empowers the believer to utter mysteries that bypass the limitations of the mind. These groanings are not vain repetitions. They are deep spiritual transactions, birthing answers and opening doors unseen to the physical eyes. In that dimension, prayer is no longer about asking for things, but about birthing realities, midwifing God's counsel into manifestation, and enforcing victory over unseen battles. It is here that men partner with the Spirit to alter territories, to shift seasons, and to bring forth destinies. And yet, even in this realm, persistence remains a law. Prayer that births results is not always instant. It often requires endurance. To stop too soon is to miscarry the answers that were already in motion. Persistence is the seal that ensures what has been decreed in the Spirit finds expression in the physical. Prayer therefore demands patience and endurance, because results are not always visible at the moment they are released. Many stop praying because they do not see immediate outcomes, but such haste aborts what would have been a testimony. The economy of heaven does not work with human impatience. It requires men who understand that timing belongs to God and that prayer must continue until seasons align. Those who persist in prayer discover that answers are always on the way, even if unseen at first. Prayer is like sowing seeds into the realm of the Spirit, and persistence is like watering those seeds until the harvest manifests. Every great testimony in Scripture and in history is proof that persistence in prayer is never wasted. The heavens always respond to those who refuse to quit. To give up too early is to forfeit victory, but to hold on is to see the faithfulness of God revealed in undeniable ways. Ultimately, prayer is the womb of greatness and the secret of power. No destiny rises beyond the quality of its prayer life. Families, individuals, and nations are preserved or lost by the strength of their altars. The man who prays is not helpless. He is dangerous, for his words summon the power of heaven to intervene in the affairs of earth. Through prayer, the weak are strengthened, the ordinary are transformed, and the broken are rebuilt into vessels of glory. Every man who desires to live a life of meaning must understand that prayer is not an option, but a necessity. It is in prayer that men are aligned, transformed, empowered, and released into destiny. The call to pray is the call to power, and the more a man bends his knees before God, the more he stands tall before circumstances. Therefore, to live without prayer is to live without power. But to live in prayer is to become a living proof that heaven still intervenes in the affairs of men.